The ROG Phone 5 is arguably one of the most powerful, most feature-laden gaming smartphone to date. So today for my review, I'm mostly going to take a look at how it performs while gaming and take a look at some of its newer features and how they work. But before we get started, let's take a look at some of the phone's key specs. The display here is a 6.78-inch Full HD 144Hz panel with 300Hz of touch sampling rate. Moving on to the back panel, the logo here now lights up in two RGB colors at the same time, which is very nice. Moving on to the camera system, you get a 64-megapixel main lens, a 13-megapixel ultra-wide lens, and a 5-megapixel macro lens. Moving back to the front, you see the phone's dual front-firing stereo speakers, which is as impressive as ever, and this time you get a new equalizer app in the phone itself called Audio Wizard. Lastly, let's talk about the hardware inside. You get a Snapdragon 888 chipset, up to 16GB of RAM. This particular model that we have is 16GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage. There is a different variant that has 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. Here are some benchmark scores to kick things off. 3D Marks Wildlife scored 5,728 points, and Slingshot Extreme had a maxed out score. PC Marks Work 2.0 scored 14,913, and Geekbench scored the device at 3,704 points on multi-threaded performance. Moving on to gaming benchmarks, let's start with Genshin Impact. This game sets the standard for mobile game graphics, and it shows in how much resource it needs to run smoothly. The first round of testing had all graphics set to maximum and the frame rates at 60 frames per second. To my delight, the game ran almost flawlessly, almost because there is the occasional stuttering, especially during battles. The downside, however, is that the phone gets scalding hot, especially in the middle back panel where the chipset is placed. People with larger hands like myself tend to reach the hotspots more easily, and it gets quite uncomfortable. This could be due to the Snapdragon 888 being a very hot mess at the moment. The only real workaround is using an Aero Active Cooler 5 that lowers temps just a bit, or just get the ROG Kunai 3 gamepad so your hands aren't even touching the phone itself. Of course, on the ROG Phone 5, you get a few new motion and gesture options for you to experiment with. You might want to tilt your phone to swap characters or something, but I find that using the Kunai 3 gamepad is the best option for Genshin. Where gestures and motion controls come in handy more is of course in Call of Duty Mobile. I like using the tilt forward function to reload and invoke memories of when you do the same thing in arcades where you tilt the gun down to reload. As usual, the air triggers work wonders here. You can always tweak the sensitivity of inputs in the Armory Crate app. COD Mobile is a well-optimized game, so it comes as no surprise that the Snapdragon 888 handles it like a boss. You can turn up the graphics and refresh rate settings and the game will still run at a steady 60 frames throughout. Once again, the phone can get pretty toasty, although not as hot as when you're running Genshin Impact. You don't have to run the game on X mode. Changing it to dynamic can help cool things down just a bit without sacrificing too much performance, but even so, the phone can still get pretty hot. Moving on to PUBG Mobile, it's a classic at this point and it runs at a steady 60 frames per second with HD graphics and extreme frame rates enabled. Playing the game at Ultra HD graphics will see the game run at a high 30 to 40 FPS. Air triggers are key here again, and I did the same motion forward gesture for reloading. There doesn't seem to be a way to have two types of input gestures on one trigger. If you have the Aero Active Cooler 5, you now get two physical buttons at the back which you can use to swap weapons in PUBG. When it comes to thermals, same story here, it runs quite hot. Sometimes a little too hot to touch, especially towards the middle of the back panel once again. Despite this, I haven't experienced any crashing or slowdown after about 2 hours of gaming or so. So far, we've mostly talked about its new gesture and motion controls along with the improved air trigger controls. Now let's move on to talk about games that actually run at 144 frames per second. Alto's Adventure is one of the games that definitely benefit from the extra frame, making it look very smooth. There's also Real Racing, which runs at 144 frames very smoothly. This time, the phone's got more realistic graphics to contend with, and meanwhile Brawl Stars is a decent competitive option that the phone can also run at about 120 to 130 frames per second. So it goes without saying that the ROG Phone 5 is a very capable gaming smartphone, especially for avid gamers who will make use of the new gesture controls, motion controls, and improved air triggers. The only real downside really is the thermals. Unfortunately, the Snapdragon 888 is a very hot chipset and it's a very common problem for phones that pack this chip. The only real drawback to this phone is the thermals, thanks to the Snapdragon 888, which is a very hot chipset, which is unfortunate. And if you bump up the graphics settings or frame rate settings on any game, which is what you should do anyways on a gaming smartphone as expensive as this, the temperature will get pretty toasty and might sear off your fingers. The only real workaround to this is to get the Aero Active Cooler 5, which you can plop at the back of your phone and should cool things down just a little bit. Unfortunately, you don't get this pre-bundled with the regular ROG Phone 5 and you have to buy it separately. With that said, if you're going to buy the ROG Phone 5, you will need to buy the Aero Active Cooler 5, otherwise things will just get too hot. The ROG Phone 5 comes in two variants, 8GB of RAM and 128GB of internal storage. This will cost you 2,999 ringgit. The second model, which comes with 16GB of RAM and 256GB of storage, will cost you 3,799 ringgit. And if you want to get the Aero Active Cooler 5, which you should, it will cost you 149 ringgit. The phone along with the cooler will be available this April 21st. Meanwhile, if you are interested in getting the ROG Kunai 3 gamepad, that will cost you 499 ringgit. The Kunai gamepad itself is the same as last time, you just get a compatible bumper that goes with the ROG Phone 5. This will cost 499 ringgit and will be available this April 21st as well. So let us know what you think of the ROG Phone 5 and its gaming performance down in the comment section below. Remember to like, subscribe. This is Victor signing off. Bye bye.